Hey there, Michael here. I hope you are doing well. Back here for another Reason RX podcast, today discussing grammar. Hope you're living the life of a good rational animal, striving for mental and physical prowess. Make the most of your mind, the most of your physical fitness, most of your mental fitness. Yeah. Be like your own version of like Abraham Lincoln. Mental prowess, physical prowess, sweet. He's in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, known for having been undefeated in all the fights we know about. Studied on his own, become a lawyer, studied Euclid's elements, that's geometry, everything we do in high school and more. Memorized all the proofs when he was in his 40s. Did it to make himself a better thinker, and it worked. Helped him be more successful in law, in politics, more fundamentally in thinking, writing, reading, speaking, but more fundamentally thinking. Helped our country be better. Good stuff. So, as I say, grammar. Yeah, I hope you're liking the podcast, the episodes. I'd recommend, I would hope you, whatever the word is, maybe it's just late, can't think of it, but hope you share it with students, parents, teachers, principals, administrators. A lot of the episodes so we can work on helping make education better for those we care about, do a little bit for ourselves, make a better world, better future for the children, for the students. That's what education's about. Especially mentally, of course, but mentally and physically helping children develop their full human nature, their full potential, is self-sovereign, social, rational animals, so they can live a good, independent life as a human, which means, of course, as a social animal too. And then if you could like, share, if you want to donate, that would help. Could get maybe better equipment or publicize more. But grammar. So, I want to discuss a little bit about not grammar police today. You don't go run off in fear. What the hell is going to happen? We want to talk about why grammar is important. Grammar, who cares? Who needs it? So, first of all, what is grammar? What is the context for it? That's important instead of kind of jumping in and having some of these unfortunate associations we do of jerks who don't know very much and criticize you for your grammar. It's used as some corrections are used as a tool for attempted superiority. Since someone isn't able to do very much else, then they might try to get superiority that way since they're weak in other ways. Some people, since we're social animals, some people just want social cred, so they're just doing that for social positioning. But forget all that stuff. Some of the annoying associations we have with it. We want to see what grammar is really about, why it's important, how it'll help us in life. Because, forget that stuff. The important thing is it'll help us communicate better. It'll help us understand each other better, be understood, read better, write better, think better. And that's what we want. We want to do better at work. We want to be better understood by our friends and loved ones. We want to understand them better. We want to write good things. So that's what we want to think about more. And grammar, if we look it up on Merriam-Webster, merriam-webster.com. Number one, A in the definitions. Grammar is, quote, the study of the classes of words, comma, their inflections and their functions and relations in the sentence, unquote. So, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and so on, how they function and how they relate to each other. And okay, I just put in grammar. Let me put in grammar definition. Shoot. Dictionary.com. There's one. Grammar. The study of the way the sentences of a language are constructed. Morphology and syntax. I like that one. Great. And so it's about our sentences and words which reflect our thoughts. So in other words, grammar is a study of how thoughts are put together in the code of a language. Different languages have different codes, different ways to relate things. There are some options in how we do some things. Different clothes, different food, different grammar, different language I'm at. But that's what we're going to think about. We want to think about, to some extent, we all need to know some grammar to put thoughts together well, to be able to craft a thought so we know better what we're thinking. We can communicate it to others. They will know us better. We can know them better, and so on and so forth. Better at work and everything. Sloppy thinking creates confusions, as we'll see some. But a different point of view from a book I'll quote from. I agree with that definition more. Okay, so now in Writing and Thinking, a Handbook of Composition and Revision by Norman Foerster and J.M. Steadman. This is from 1931. I'll do some quotes from there. Now they say in their book, and I don't entirely agree with this, quote, okay, so wait, this is correctness, section correctness, grammar, page 127. I'll put links to the thing I'm quoting from, so you can look at this book on Internet Archive for free. Sweet. So, quote, the function of grammar is to codify the sounds, inflections, and syntax of words, to describe systematically the speech habits of the best writers and speakers. Since these speech habits are always undergoing some alterations, we may say that a living language, as opposed to a dead language, evolves much like an organism. Old words and constructions are abandoned. New words and constructions are added. Grammar, which describes these evolving speech habits, also changes, only more slowly and conservatively. It refuses to recognize modifications of the language until they have clearly established their title. Unless one is among the leading writers and speakers, therefore, the proper thing to do is to abide by the rules of the latest code. Unquote. So cool. To some extent there. It's like, what are the rules of the language? To some extent, they're saying the same thing, but maybe focusing on the best writers, like people, instead of what seems to be more something objective. Because grammar should be about thinking well and reflecting that, and not just doing what the hell ever. Okay. Now, we talked about sentences and thinking, and there's some ideas of what grammar is. But how does it relate to thinking and why. So here, I want to read an excerpt from Writing and Thinking also. Beginning of the book, really good. It'll help in some of that regard. Very first part of the book. This is from the very first part of the book. First pages, where they're establishing context for everything that's to come. They say in a section entitled Thought and Expression. Okay, so here's the long excerpt. Quote, writing and thinking are organically related to each other. This fact is at the heart of the problem of literary composition. The problem confronting a person who sits down to write may be stated very simply. Given a thought or feeling, required words that will express this thought or feeling and convey it to the reader unchanged. The solution may be stated just as simply. The words required for the expression of the thought or feeling are the words inherent in the thought or feeling itself. They are not cunningly devised by the writer, invented and arranged by him with a view to impressing the reader. He does nothing but find them in the place where they spring to life, i.e. in the mind, unquote. Okay, so, yeah, in other words, don't write contrived. Don't say something to write well. Don't write contrived. Don't say things you think other people want to hear. If people don't have enough of a developed vocabulary or ability to conceptually identify, discriminate, find similarities and differences, it'll affect the ability to write, the ability to think, and therefore the ability to write, the ability to express the thoughts clearly and precisely. Okay, so, quote, writing, in other words, should be organic, not mechanic. Quote, the form is mechanic, unquote, says Coleridge. Quote, when on any given material we impress a predetermined form. Unquote. As when the gardener trims a cedar tree in order to force it into the unnatural form of a pyramid. Okay, I'll unquote there. So there's a quote from Coleridge. And yeah, it's a mechanic form, not organic, when you impress words on the thought instead of the other way around. Okay, so back to a quote of a quote. So here I think he's quoting Coleridge again. We'll see. So, quote, the organic form, on the other hand, is innate. It shapes as it develops itself from within, and the fullness of its development is one and the same with the perfection of its outward form. Such as life is, such is the form. Nature, the prime genial artist, inexhaustible in diverse powers, is equally inexhaustible in forms. Each exterior is a physiognomy of the being within, its true image, unquote. Granted a favorable environment, the tree as nature makes it, the cedar, the pine, the oak, the willow, assumes its proper shape as it develops itself from within. The mature tree is already implicit in the seed. In the acorn resides the grandeur of the oak. The kernel idea attains its necessary expression in the mature organism. It is the same when the artist is not nature but man. Shakespeare in Macbeth, Keats in his sonnet, quote, on first looking into Chapman's Homer, unquote, Lincoln in his, quote, Gettysburg Address, unquote, did not plan their compositions with rule and compass and cleverly arrange fine words, and did not work mechanically, but having a given idea to express, they allowed it to grow from within, nourishing it with a mental and spiritual attention, till it was ready to issue as a work of art, unquote. So, yeah, you got to take some time and effort to think exactly what you want to say. Oh, like, man, if you look at what Henry David Thoreau's Walden, Well, if you look at all the drafts he went through, which you can see online, I'll have to make a note to put up some of that. I went through that one time with a student, helped write a paper on Walden. Man, we did a lot of work. I read the thing numerous times, dug into it. Super sweet. And there's drafts of it you could read as thorough, edited, and made his thought better and tried to figure out what words he needed to express his thought. Okay. As Foerster and Steadman say here, Thoreau allowed it to grow from within, nourishing it with a mental and spiritual attention till Walden was ready to issue as a work of art. Unquote. Yeah. Okay, so back to it. Quote, since they worked organically, the resulting form became the only possible form for that particular thought that they had. Quote, such is the life, comma, such is the form, unquote. Assuming that they completely expressed what they meant to express, we may say that they could not alter, and that we could not alter a single word without expressing something else. Strictly speaking, the only way of explaining what a literary composition contains is to repeat it word for word. The poem, the address, means what it says and nothing else. This is equally true of the whole and of every part. We cannot adequately paraphrase a single line, give its meaning in other words than the author employed. Does Shakespeare's line, to be or not to be, comma, that is the question, mean exactly the same thing as to exist or not to exist, dash, which is preferable? Or, shall I end my life? Or, shall I commit suicide? Does the first of these mean no more than the last? Does it not, for one thing, contain more feeling? Again, to take another example, does Pope's line, quote, hope springs eternal in the human breast, unquote, contain the very same thought as hope is deeply rooted in man? Or man is never without hope? Or men are always hopeful? Or people never stop hoping? No doubt the meanings are closely similar, but they are not identical and could not be unless the words were identical. These are not various ways of saying the same thing. And what is true of paraphrase is true of translation. Unquote. Okay, so again, hope springs eternal in the human breast is not, men are always hopeful, lame, or to be or not to be, that is the question. It's not the same as to exist or not to exist, which is preferable. Okay, grammar, word choice, diction, matter, expressing the thought well, which is what grammar will help us do. There's different things that come up in this here, but grammar is part of it, and punctuation. Okay, quote, speaking of foreign classics, Thoreau says that he must read them in the original because there are no translations. There are so-called translations, to be sure, but on account of the organic unity of thought and expression, they necessarily fail to reproduce exactly the author's meaning. The only way to read Homer is to read Homer, not Pope's translation or Bryant's or any other. For a good book, as Milton says, is the precious lifeblood of a master spirit, to be known only by direct communion. Unquote. Okay. So there is some development of the idea of how writing expresses thinking, and thinking is a fundamental. And he has like another paragraph here, and then he says, quote, writing and thinking then are merely two aspects of the same thing. Whether we refer to the whole poem, short story, or expository article, or to its constituent sentences. What is a sentence? It is a group of words expressing a complete thought or feeling. It must express a thought, one thought, not part of a thought, nor more than a thought. Unquote. All right. So there is some basic fundamentals. About grammar and its roots. We have conceptual thinking as human animals. Other animals are conscious. There's some very advanced preconceptual conscious functions and activities that can go on. But then we have this added aspect of our consciousness. Reason develops out of perception and properly done is unified with it. So out of thinking, we have grammar arising, the need for it in language. And here's another quote I should read, similar to what I just did earlier, but quote, "The fundamental requirement of the sentence is that it express one complete thought, neither more nor less. Or, as the grammarians say, it must have unity." Unquote. Nice. And that's what grammar is allowing us to do. So, as some examples, let's see, in here, I'll move this tab over. Got these tabs together. This definition page over here. Can put some links to this stuff in the class notes and the show notes. So yeah, so if you want to, should have said that earlier. If people want to read along while we're doing this or look at on their own, I'll put links to this stuff. Exact pages where you can start. So one aspect of grammar, one thing I like, where is that? It's called parallelism. Parallelism rocks. I teach this when I do SAT and ACT stuff because it comes up on the test and it's good to know. So much you can do with it. There can be parallelism within a sentence, or two sentences can be parallel constructed, or paragraphs can be parallel constructed. But what the hell is parallelism? Okay, parallelism is a sentence construction in which thoughts that function the same, or words that function the same, are expressed the same grammatically. So the same function, same grammar. That helps us see the thought and put it together without confusion. Makes it more clear. Just like color coding stuff, or like if you're in a restaurant and everyone who works there has on the same kind of like color or outfit, then you know who works there and who doesn't. Parallelism helps like that, or like teams wear different uniforms, different colors, then you know who's who. Okay? How to put things together. So, about, this is in the section Parallelism. I'll read a little bit of this. So, quote, "Let us follow out our principle that the structure of the sentence depends on the nature of the thought to be expressed." I'll read it again. Okay, unquote. So, quote, "Let us follow out our principle that the structure of the sentence depends on the nature of the thought to be expressed, and observe how it applies to one or two other important matters of sentence construction. We have seen that when any parts of our sentence thought are different in rank, when some are chief and others are subordinate, we must, in order to be strictly truthful, express this logical difference through a structural difference," unquote. And that's called subordination. Like if you tell the time something happened with a when statement, we need to use the word when to subordinate it. So when is a subordinating conjunction. He stole my car when I wasn't looking, you know. Usually he stole my car will be more important, so we wouldn't want to say, when he stole my car, I wasn't looking. Unless there's some particular case where you want to stress that, but most of the time, the car being stolen is going to be more important. So I wasn't looking is going to be less important. So we need to subordinate that because there's a logical difference. Okay? One's more important than the other and so on. So we have a structural difference, a visual auditory difference, because language is a visual auditory code. So we need something visual auditory or haptic by touch, like Braille. Braille is haptic, H-A-P-T-I-C, which means touch. I'll put a link to the etymology of the word. Better put that up here before I forget. It's kind of late, and I'm a little tired, and I might forget. So there. Now, Parallelism tab again. Find it. Okay. So, quote again. Okay, there's a subordination thing. Now, quote, it naturally follows that when any parts of our sentence thought are of the same rank, are logically coordinate, we must express this logical sameness through a structural sameness. Unquote. So here he's talking about parallelism. Things that function the same should be expressed the same. Quote, we must express this logical sameness through a structural sameness, unquote. Okay. Grammar. So, quote, for example, let us suppose that we desire to express a complete thought composed of two parts logically coordinate. Coordinate, of course, unquote, coordinate being of the same order. Subordinate, like a subordinate in rank in the military. Coordinate of the same rank. Sub, below, co, together. So, quote, we shall then write a compound sentence containing two clauses. The chairman was Mr. Simpson, comma, and the secretary was Mr. Holt. If our thought has three parts, we shall write, I came, I saw, I conquered. In these cases, subordination would positively distort the thought. It would not be quite the truth to say, having come, I saw, I conquered. The chairman was Mr. Simpson, the secretary being Mr. Holt. If we now suppose that we desire to express a complete thought composed of three constituent part thoughts, one main thought, and two subordinate thoughts, we shall, of course, put the main thought into the principal clause and the subordinate thoughts into parallel subordinate clauses. If the rain stops, comma, and if the roads are good enough, comma, the inspector will drive on to Stockton in the morning, unquote. So there's two conditions there. The conditions he needs to drive on. Roads being good, rain stopping. So I'll read that sentence again. Good subordination. Quote, if the rain stops, comma, and if the roads are good enough, comma, the inspector will drive on to Stockton in the morning. So notice, unquote. So notice the sounds help us put things together. The if. Short things, if the rain stops, if the roads are good enough. They have the sound if, or the visual symbol if, helps us key into it. And they're short. Then we know what's going to happen. Okay. Quote, the first two thoughts have been expressed in the form of conditional clauses introduced by if, because they are related to the third and main thought in precisely the same way. The inspector's driving on to Stockton is dependent on the two contingencies. Since the subordinate ideas are parallel, they are put into parallel constructions. It would not do to say, should the rain stop, and if the roads are good enough, the inspector will drive on to Stockton in the morning. Should is a verb, whereas if is a conjunction. There could be no parallelism until we changed our verb in conjunction to either two verbs or two conjunctions, unquote. So, for example, he could say, instead of the if, to be parallel, quote, should the rain stop, and should the roads be good enough, comma, the inspector will drive on to Stockton in the morning. There you got the two verbs he's talking about. Okay. Quote, two practical suggestions, if borne in mind, will help in the detection and correction of faulty parallelism. First, remember that the sign of parallelism is grammatical. We should have two or more participles to infinitives, to pronouns, to prepositions, etc. If the principle of parallelism gives us trouble, we may be reasonably certain that the cause of the trouble is in our imperfect acquaintance with grammatical forms. In this event, the obvious remedy is to go to our grammar and study carefully, among other things, the parts of speech. Before we can master parallel construction, we must be able to state the part of speech of every word in any sentence, unquote. Okay, so quote, secondly, fix your attention on the first word or phrase. This is always made the sign of parallelism, provided that we have two clauses introduced by if, or two clauses introduced by should. We may be sure that they are parallel, even, next page, what, okay, I lost my pages, sorry, subordination, wrong pages, parallelism, there, okay, there we go. So, back to the quote, click here, all right, so start again. Provided that we have two clauses introduced by if or two clauses introduced by should, we may be sure that they are parallel, even if the latter parts of the clauses differ. For example, in the sentence already given, if the rain stops and if the roads are good enough, the inspector will drive on to Stockton in the morning. The phrase good enough follows the are of the second clause, whereas the verb stops of the first clause stands alone. And yet the two clauses are regarded as parallel in construction, just as two lines may be parallel without being of the same length, unquote. All right, so there is a useful grammatical construction. I recommend you read more about this. I'll have to put some more in the show notes about parallelism too. How it's used in literature, some examples, a letter Lincoln wrote about in which he used parallelism. Or here's one. Okay, here's a familiar illustration from Julius Caesar that Foerster and Steadman have about parallelism. Helps you see it's got some kind of some repetition. Parallelism gives you, helps you see what's going on, creates some more power to what they're saying. So, quote, who is here so base that would be a bondman? If any, speak. For him I have offended. Who is here so rude that would not be a Roman? If any, speak. For him I have offended. Who is here so vile that will not love his country? If any, speak. For him have I offended. So we got that repetition there, unquote. So there's your parallelism. Okay. So there's one aspect of grammar that helps you see what's in the thought and how the writing comes out of the thought and expresses it, and see the importance of grammar and what it's more really about, and not like people being jerks. It's about communicating better, more clearly, more beautifully. Another part of it is economy, and they talk about it in here. So, economy, they say, quote, writing is not, of course, a private matter. To some extent it is. So I would disagree. It can be private, or it can not be private, because sometimes we write just to develop our thoughts, as in a diary or writing book. Okay, quote, when we speak of it as self-expression, we do not mean that we write merely to amuse ourselves, to give our powers play. Sometimes we do write for such a motive, but at the same time, in the background of the mind is an ever-present sense of the public. Well, that's not really relevant. Okay, so here, now he's getting to what is more interesting. So, quote, I don't like his justification, because really, writing and language and grammar are about expressing our thought, and that's why this should be the justification for this, I think. But it's their book, and they write. So here, still, this is a good part. So, quote, it follows that good writing,
like good machinery, must operate smoothly with a minimum of friction. Economy demands that the thought be transferred in its entirety and without distortion. Any mode of writing that calls attention to itself violates the principle of economy. If the attention of the reader is attracted to offensive misspellings, to blunders in grammar, to misleading punctuation, to the use of slang, to excessive cleverness in phrasing, to the use of showy language, to monotony of sentence construction, the amount of attention given to the thought is diminished in proportion. It is as though, in telling a man where John Jones lives, we interspersed our directions with disturbing comments on the state of the weather and the high cost of living in these parts. Once more, we must return to our fundamental principle: the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It is the writer's message that we want, nothing more or less. Then he talks about some, unquote. Then he talks about some sentence constructions, misplacing a modifier, and some things like that. But there, another aspect of grammar, it's saying things in an economical way. I'll see if maybe I can give some examples of that in the show notes about misplaced modifiers. Okay, so there's another aspect of grammar that's important, how it comes from thinking, again, to develop that idea. So, to repeat at this point, grammar from dictionary.com, the study of the way sentences of a language are constructed. So again, we want to do it well so we can think well, communicate well, be understood, understand ourselves, understand others, very important. And it's part of logic. Therefore, here is a good excerpt from The Art of Nonfiction by Ayn Rand, the philosopher and novelist. So here, very interesting stuff. Okay. Quote, Americans do not know English grammar, unquote. And of course, just because of the way the school system is, it's unfortunate, it shouldn't be. Like I work with people on SAT and ACT prep, 12th graders, they cannot tell me what the subject of a sentence is. That's unfortunate. They should have more mastery of their own thinking. They're being limited. Clearly we all, even if someone can't pick out the subject, we know what we're talking about. We're not stupid. We can think really well. But we should have the mastery of knowing what exactly is the subject that we're talking about. What's the focus of our thought? And know better about how our thoughts are put together. I mean, we're human. It's rational. Grammar is not some irrelevant thing. Grammar is about love of life and is about respecting an important part of our human nature, the rational aspect. Language, science, thinking. It's so wrapped up in important in most everything we do. Wherever we turned our mind to think, conceptual thought, we need grammar to help us. As I say, at work, dealing with friends, being understood, understanding them, so on and so forth. It's a matter of loving life and being the best we can. That's why we should study grammar, and that's how it should be in the culture instead of some of this nonsense. Quote, it is all the more ridiculous coming from someone like me with a Russian accent. I do not mind, okay, unquote. So, the fact that Americans don't know English, and she's saying that, she's Russian, she was born in Russia, and she's kind of pointing out that she shouldn't be saying that because people in America should know English better than she. But, quote, I do not mind the other errors in writing so much, but this one is the hardest for me to encounter, to work with, and to correct, because it represents a cultural phenomenon, and you are not responsible for it. The educational system is. Americans are trained, unquote. This is for the most part, not all of every American, of course, but too many Americans are trained through. So, quote, Americans are trained through the look-say approach to reading and all allied Dewey-based ideas of education to be emotional approximators. The non-objective, ungrammatical way in which people express themselves today is truly frightening. What has been systematically undercut is their capacity for objective communication. Americans tend to express themselves guided by feelings, not by thoughts. According to modern theory, there are no such things as thoughts, and even if there were, they could not guide us, unquote. So she's talking about some modern philosophy you might not be aware of, and I think she wrote this in, 50s, 60s, and it's still relevant. But, and she says it's truly frightening because insofar as just like Martin Luther King, she wanted a better society. Martin Luther King also said something like, I forget the exact quote, education, so it's something like, quote, this is a paraphrase, but I'll see the best I can remember right now. Quote, education must also train for quick, resolute, and effective thinking. To think incisively and to think for oneself is very difficult. We are prone to let our mental life become invaded by legions of half-truths, prejudices, and propaganda. At this point, unquote, and then I forget exactly what he says, and then, quote, even the press, the classroom, the platform, and the pulpit, in many instances, do not give us objective and unbiased truths. To save man from the morass of propaganda, in my opinion, is the chief aim of education. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the fact from the fiction, unquote. So he would agree. What's frightening is that things could and should be better, and that people aren't living their optimal life, making the most of it. People are doing all right, of course, kind of getting by, enjoying some things, but we should just love life and make the most of it, and there shouldn't be some of the things getting in the way of that in some societies. But, quote, what has been systematically undercut is their capacity for objective communication. Americans tend to express themselves guided by feelings, not by thoughts. According to modern theory, there are no such things as thoughts. Even if there were, they could not guide us, unquote. Again, that's some philosophy. Some here will know about, some might not have heard about, but some philosophical undercurrents out there directing and shaping different parts of our culture. Okay, quote, I am not a grammarian by profession. I do not know the grammatical rules of English by name, only by practice. But whenever I struggle with a sentence and finally get it straight, I bless whoever invented these rules, and I know there is a reason behind them. If they were irrational, they would not survive. Sometimes grammarians do attempt irrational, arbitrary rules, but people do not abide by rules that complicate communication rather than clarify it. One of the most important applications of the objectivist attitude toward reason is grammar, unquote. And by objectivism here, she means the philosophy she developed and lives by, developed out of Aristotle's thought, consistent with and building on a lot of Aristotelian ideas and adding more to them and correcting some things. So, quote, one of the most important applications of the objectivist attitude toward reason is grammar. The ability to think precisely and thus to write precisely cannot be achieved without observing grammatical rules. Grammar has the same purpose as concepts. The rules of grammar are rules for using concepts precisely. Since sentences consist of concepts, the whole secret of grammar is clarity and the avoidance of equivocation. The grammar of language, tells us how to organize our concepts so as to make them communicate a specific, unequivocal meaning. If you compare the number of concepts we have with the vastly greater number of phenomena we deal with and have to describe by means of these concepts, you will grasp the importance of grammatical sentence structure. If it were not for grammar, we could have words but could not speak sentences. We could merely say, for example, me Tarzan, you Jane. That is the nature of primitive languages. Civilized languages, need my next thing here. Civilized languages, by contrast, let me make this JPEG bigger. Okay, similar languages, by contrast, have a grammar precisely because we deal with more than first level, perceptually based concepts. If you have to deal with the abstract, with abstraction from abstractions, you must know in what order and by what rules to organize them in order to communicate a specific thought. We are all bored by grammar in school. Memorizing rules is very dull. But by the time you reach college, you should realize how important those rules are. Therefore, if you know why we should fight for reason and for the right view of concepts, then let us, on the same grounds, have a crusade for grammar. Unquote. So notice she means in a way different way than some jerks mean. This is having grammar and recognizing it to make us better, to help other people, to love life, and to really develop our human nature and appreciate it. It's a positive thing, not some negative dictatorial thing. Totally different outlook, perspective, and context in valuation. Okay. Quote, make it a rule to know sentence structure, to know which form communicates a thought and which is open to 10 different readings. And you will understand the importance of grammar, not only for writing, but for cognition in general. You have to think grammatically. Do not accept ideas half in words and half with the feeling, I kind of know what it means. Formulate what you think and why in specific words, even when you are alone. This is why it is advisable, if the thought is too abstract, to take notes. When you make notes, you are obliged to put the thought into an objective form, not for your reader, but for yourself. Unquote. So in other words, you got something written down on the paper, not just thinking you know it. You can look on the paper and see that there's a sentence. I think she means objective like that. Take notes, but with complete sentences, not just a word or a phrase. If you have a complete sentence, it shows you've expressed a complete thought. Okay, quote, always reduce your convictions to a verbal formulation of your own. That is the first step toward grammatical clarity in your thinking and toward making grammar and precision a habit. The difficulty here is that most of you today are so used to a subjective shorthand that you lose the distinction between your own inner context and an objective statement. Unquote. And again, it's because of the culture, educational system, most of the culture, most educational system, not all of it. Of course, some people are doing great work, but too much is not too much out there. Some of the aspects and trends in the culture and educational system are not good enough for us. We deserve better. Quote, it is permissible to use a mental shorthand in thinking if it is clear to you, but a stenographer would be of no value if she could not transcribe her shorthand into a document in English. Similarly, when it comes time to write, you must translate your shorthand into objective language. If you have forgotten your grade school lessons, get a good primer on grammar, preferably an old one, and revive your knowledge. You will be surprised how much more important it appears to you now than it did when you were a child. The reason is that today, in reading those dry rules, you know why they were formed and why they are rational. Unquote. Agreed. That's awesome. And I'll put a link to this. No, I can't. You'd have to buy the book. I'll have to maybe put an excerpt on a blog and link to that, because I wouldn't have the room in the show notes to excerpt all this. But yeah, I agree. Get a grammar book. I'll put some links to some, especially sentence diagramming books. Those are awesome. Really good way to learn grammar. I'll put a link to some that are good, that have answers so you can check your work. They have numerous exercises and help build you up step by step. Really nice ways. Good progressions. And as she says here, in the meantime, one more little quote. Quote, apart from a review of grammar by means of a good primer, I would suggest the following. When a sentence of yours seems dubious, ask yourself some simple questions such as, what is the subject and what is the predicate? Unquote. So predicate being the verb or thing you're talking about. Subject, verb, predicate. So yeah, what's a subject and then what are the things you're saying of it? But, okay, so there's why grammar is important, what its nature really is, how it's important to our life, some underlying ideas in philosophy so we know more why and how it should be taught. Because it'll be very different if someone has a philosophy of grammar where it's a bunch of arbitrary rules, then they won't have much motivation. It doesn't matter. Might even be stricken from school. How about that? If they think it's arbitrary, they'll strike it from school. Sound familiar? But that's just one cause and effect thing that can happen. There's other reasons too. Some people want to get rid of it, but people could also think that it's oppressive. That's pretty illogical and not really looking into the nature of what's going on. Invalid reasoning, misleading people, operating on hate, trying to make people irrational. If someone doesn't know good grammar, they cannot think as well, express their thoughts as well. And so someone can be like an intellectual bully and affect some people that way. They can say they want to teach grammar or English, throw it out, produce people who cannot think as well, and then they know that they've kind of destroyed some people, just like a bully might want to control or destroy. So that's some things, some motivations. Again, you got to do something appropriate to the person, do a 5 whys. That's not what every person is doing out there who's against grammar. Every person in general. But some nihilism is a thing. Hatred for good things is a thing. Unfortunately. It's a thing among some people. But someone can think grammar is some kind of rigid system we need to adhere to. And, there is where you'd have some of the people kind of being grammar Nazis and thinking they're superior to you. But then we got to blindly obey some rules, follow authority, be like someone who's got to serve Hitler or the Pharaoh or something. But no, grammar should be something that helps us achieve and realize more of our human nature, the rational aspect of us. Again, so we can think better, more clearly, know more what we're talking about, be clear about the world around us and what's going on, and communicate that to other people. Totally different context than some of these other things. So, that'll produce a different motivation in the teacher, motivation in the students. There'll be a different passion for it than with these other things. You know, if it's some classical thing where you got to stick to it and obey it, you know, you got to follow the rules and shut up and obey. That's not something that an independent mind is going to like very much. There'll be a rebellion. That's not someone who thinks who thinks each individual has dignity is going to like very much. No. Grammar should be about respecting the individual and their dignity, and about respecting other people and being good, having us be good, self-sovereign, social, rational animals. So, there, as I say, it's more of a proper philosophy of grammar, part of it. Grammar is something we need to express our thoughts, as Ayn Rand and Foerster and Steadman said. And logic is important in education, as people like Martin Luther King Jr. have said. And I like the idea of Ayn Rand that grammar is a part of logic. That's something I never thought of on my own. I didn't quite see it that way. They seemed like different, but it makes sense because grammar is how we put concepts together. So, hope that helps. But yeah, hope that gives you some good information about grammar and what it is and how we should think about it. Hope it motivates you to dig into some sentence diagramming and dig into grammar a little bit more. Do it on your own. Influence friends and workers and family to do more. And again, you know, recommend this to teachers, principals, schools. And if people want grammar instruction, I do that. I do classes in sentence diagramming. I work with people on that. Can do it individually, group classes, can help out schools with it, can do consulting, talk to all the teachers of a school about doing sentence diagramming, because all of them should write and all of them should know how to express their thoughts well to teach. That's what part of what teaching's about. You need to be able to express your thoughts to someone else. You need to know what your thoughts are and express them and help other people form those thoughts in their head, build them. So it'll help in a lot of different ways. Not just English teachers, but others should be able to do it too and bring it up in class. Like in geometry, in the proofs, understanding theorems. I mean, grammar is very important there. I use it. But yeah, I'm able to consult, teach, things like that, and I'll put some links in the class notes, in the show notes for you. But cool. As I say, hope this helped. Hope you enjoyed it. Spread it, spread the ideas, and get out there, live a good human life, be a good human animal. Hopefully you're working on achieving optimal mental and physical prowess. Thank you. Peace out.